Welcome to another episode of Coffee Chat by OFFERGOBLIN. I'm Mike Neal. This is Ryan Tan. We are the leading coaches in investment banking recruitment. Today, we're going to talk about a really important and interesting topic, one that applies to more than investment banking, and one that somehow, despite how universal it is, many people still get wrong. I think that this topic will help anyone, whether you're banking, whether you're finance in other fields, whether you're engineering even, because all of these principles always apply. And the topic is resume. We're going to focus on this really key document that essentially determines whether you're going to get an interview or not. And also to say, by the time they get your resume, hopefully they've already sort of talked to you, but sometimes the resume is the first thing that they see. And so it's really important to make a first impression. So we're going to kind of go through the sort of principles and sort of like broader aspects of that into some of the more technical details. And by the end, we'll also share a resume template that you can use to get started. So before we jump into all that, Ryan, how you doing, man? What's new? What's happening in recruitment? Let's hear.
Thanks, Mike. It's good to see you again. Nice to know that you're out of the woods. No,
A
things
little
are
bit.
good old dandy. Gonna head back into the woods soon. No, recruiting is you still got the same mix. It's summer right now. People are busy on their interns. The analysts, they have their projects. You see a wide variety. Some folks are pretty stressed out about their final projects. Others are chugging along happily. There's a lot of coaching within the current analyst pool to make sure for folks who really want to succeed. Yeah, and then you have people who are trying to lateral and others trying to prepare for fall recruiting. And then you have the freshmen and rising sophomores who are getting ready to recruit for fall. So
Yeah.
you see a wide mix. You see a wide mix.
Yeah, on my end, it's more and more rumblings of the MBA. We've talked about that last week, but MBAs kind of know by this point that they're going to their program or not. And a lot of them are deciding they're going to go into banking. I've had a lot of them reach out, and we're doing a lot of these sort of 90-minute story development sessions, which I'd highly recommend. You can book that through the link in the descriptions or the bio in all of our content. Um, Outside of that, I'd say on a personal level for me, I'm going out tomorrow for 10 days, paddling from Ely, Minnesota, which is a border town, sort of in the middle center of or sort of the northern middle of the state, out to Lake Superior. We're going to paddle about 167 miles from here to Lake Superior. It'll be about 10 days with a group of 5 of us. So
You're
pretty
paddling in the
intense.
middle of Lake Superior?
Well, we're going to be paddling out to Lake Superior from sort of the entry of the from the middle of the state, sort of from the
160
northern center.
miles. Just paddling in the middle of
167 miles.
nowhere.
That's right. And this route is one that was used by the voyagers. So they were French traders, French fur traders. They would essentially gather fur, which is like beaver pelt and other types of fur from this area, and paddle canoes from kind of where we are and all along these chains out to Lake Superior, what they call the Voyager Highway. And that ends with Grand Portage, which is an 8.5 mile portage out into Lake Superior. There's a big fort there, and that's where they used to kind of pick things up in order to go bring all of those things to Europe. So quite an interesting thing. The Voyager Highway, I think it'll be a lot of fun. Despite that, I am bringing this set of little items here. This is a couple things. One, to kind of prop up a phone and sort of attach it to a tree or some kind of a pole. And this device, which is for a microphone. So I'm using the microphone currently, but you can see in there. So this
So
is a
next time we
nice,
see, you're going to be reporting in from Lake Superior. How
well,
fast are you
podcast.
paddling?
Well, we got a pretty good group. I mean, this is a pretty advanced kind of trip. So we don't,
Yeah.
people that are going on this are quite experienced. It's kind of a gateway trip for a lot of people to kind of get into more advanced trips. So It's a lot of fun, and I really love this sort of sport of it and the engineering of it, as you can imagine, trying to pack light and trying to, reuse as many things as possible. But I'm going to try to film some content along the way. Not this podcast, but some other sort of content along the way. We'll see how that goes, if maybe all of that footage will get discarded or not, but we'll give that a shot. It'll be a little interesting experiment. All right. So, without further ado, let's jump into the resume. So, I want to give some few very broad rules. I'd love to hear yours as well, Ryan, but I'll just kind of jump into some of those. So, the first one
Okay.
is one page. Your resume needs to be one page. Like it's almost, I don't know that there's any industry, maybe academia, it's acceptable to have more than one page because you may have a lot of published works, but everything needs to be condensed onto one page. There's really no excuse for that other than that. And I guess to preface these rules, if you break these rules, it'll be kind of obvious that you broke them. And it won't really sort of that creativity or going outside of the bounds. It's not really going to reflect well on you. Your goal for your resume is for the template and the style to be sort of as predictable and boring as possible so that they can kind of scan through it and parse through it really fast. So as we kind of give these rules, there's a reason why they exist. It's not just the utility of the rule itself, but it's also that you want to sort of conform. Think of your resume as almost like a suit. It's like an envelope, and you just want it to be very standard. You don't want anything to be unusual. So the first one is making it one page. The second rule is that, and this is a rule that I think is maybe more personal to me, but one line per bullet. Each bullet should be one line. It shouldn't go into two lines. And the reason for that is everything should be simple, direct, and concise. Your sentence structure should be one that you could read and really instantly interpret. Um, and we'll talk a little bit more as we kind of get into the weeds of let's say, how to actually write those things, but that's just another formatting tip. Um, there's a standard set of this next rule is sort of on the formatting. There's a standard set of your name, your education on top, your work experience, and then the additional details sort of on the bottom. And you don't really, again, you don't really want to play with this. You can check the description to find a link for this, but no need to really mess with that. We'll talk more about the sort of structure of a sentence later on. The other thing that I like to see is the same number of bullets per section. So or per I guess element, you could say. So think about if you have three different jobs that you've done, each one should have four bullet points. Unless there's oh, these ones were kind of old, maybe those each have two, but the main ones should have let's say four, and they should each have 4 to 5. So an equal number to give it that balance. The other thing is use this template because you don't want to be playing around with margins. You don't want to be playing around with font. You don't want to be playing around with font sizes. The spacing game that people get into where they start to lower the spacing of this section and expand this one to try to make all these things work is really not it's not smart, because there's a reason that you're constrained. There's a reason that you're constrained to fewer words, and that's because they really aren't going to read that many more words. There's a reason that the spacing is set up that way, because it's easier for someone to read. So it's more important that the resume is easy to read, scannable, and predictable than you kind of shoving in every single idea and concept of everything you've ever worked on into one document. So I would say those are sort of my overview pieces. But Ryan, what's your kind of bigger overarching rules as it relates to the resume kind of as a whole?
Well, thanks, Mike. I think no, a lot of those points you brought up are good, though I might differ with one or two of those, but I mean, those are all minute parts. But I think overall resumes is you want to think of it as it's your first impression, right? A resume is also, there's so many things we can use strategically with a resume. So I like to think of it more philosophically first before you get into the weeds. is start with the end in mind. It's like, what are you using this resume for? As well as how are they viewing? When we look at resumes, you're probably getting like 5 to 10 seconds looked at. So your resumes needs to be clean, be very easy to get the message across, and somebody who's, think of it as, look, the guy on the other end who is screening you, reading you, he's been working for 80 to 100 hours a week. Don't make his life difficult, right? So have relevant experience, relative job descriptions, relevant bullet points, relevant extracurriculars, and very clean formatting. Don't have any typos or errors, and don't make the guy hunt. If I have to spend, more than 20, 30 seconds before I can figure out what the hell you're doing, I'm just moving on, right? And so
Mm.
most people underinvest in in their resume. I would say your resume is not only for screening the whole 10 seconds, but it also lays out your entire strategy, your story, your template, your roadmap, what you want to do at coffee chats, how do you walk yourself through interviews. I'd say by far it is the most important piece in starting your IB journey, which unfortunately a lot of people don't invest in it, or
Hmm.
they just feel like it's a kitchen sink dump with everything I've done in my entire life, which is not the case.
Yeah. And it's a good maybe time to mention also like where how the resume like fits into the process. So as you go and do like cold emails, right, and you're requesting for a coffee chat, you should attach your resume. A lot of times, I think even the thank you note, you should attach your resume. You almost always attach your resume in correspondences that you have. Um, like another one would be like as you schedule a meeting invite, you attach your resume. And that I think the only limit of that is like if you're sort of lateraling and you don't want to appear as like much of a candidate, you want to appear as more of a peer. There's like some cases where you wouldn't do that, but for the most part, your resume will be a document that's attached to a lot of correspondences. And then later on in the process, when you actually have to submit the official application, that's obviously going to be included as well. Um, I will say that another kind of general thing about resume it, well, actually, let's get into this like sort of second piece of this. So those are sort of I'd say the broader like frame and format and structure and those sorts of things. Let's talk a little bit more about like the actual content, and we can go section by section. So like if you're looking at like a resume, the first thing that you're going to see is an education section. One thing that a lot of people kind of do or don't do is like adding like relevant coursework. In my opinion, I wouldn't. I think for undergrads, I would lean more towards like it's okay to put relevant coursework. But in general, I don't think coursework is as strong as showing like, let's say you got a certain scholarship or you were leader of a particular group or you were involved in certain extracurriculars and or you're on the dean's list or things like that. I think that usually for me, the education section is stronger when it lists those things. I personally like if I was reviewing someone's resume and I looked at like courses that they took, I wouldn't it wouldn't necessarily for me it just wouldn't necessarily skew my opinion because you doing a course, you may have gotten not a great grade in it, you may have like halfway paid attention, but stuff like being the president of an organization that holds a lot more weight to me. Or projects also. But Ryan, I guess where do you come down on that education section?
So two parts, and before we even dive into the education section, I just want to point out two things is, and I see this sometimes, is don't put a purpose on your
Hmm.
resume for IB. I think like that just takes up space. Maybe for other industries, you might say, look, goal is to find a computer programming job. I've seen that in other industries, but don't put that in IB, right? That's just like someone sees that, it's like, why are you wasting white space? And like
Hmm.
you just don't get the game, right? It's like you kind of just get written off. Don't put like what you're searching for or um like a personal statement. I've seen that done before by people who don't know what they're doing, right? That gets written off and that takes up a lot of white space. Now, on the education part, I will say this. If you're at the MBA level, don't put education, right? You're kind of like when I mean don't put education, don't put courses, right? At the MBA level, right? It's like you're expected to know that, right? At the undergrad level, I think I tell them to. So I put the scholarships and I put the achievement and the awards and all that. That's like no brainer. But the coursework I will also put is only relevant coursework, right? Don't put like things that are not relevant. Like don't put like classic literature as like but if you take in accounting, that's helpful. If you take in like valuation, or if you're recruiting for healthcare banking, if you take in, for example, biology, biochemistry, or infectious diseases, right? Those are relevant. I see the coursework as more like at the undergrad level, you'd be surprised on how many kids don't know their accounting or basic valuation. And so it's like, for me, it's like kind of like a quick checkbox that like, this isn't a kid that's going to show up and go, what's free cash flow? Right. Which a lot of undergrads have no clue. Like, so I generally have like one quick line along with their academics. For example, academics, their GPA, and if they have a really good SAT score, I put it in. Things to just make you show that you're qualified, you get it, quick scan. You took accounting, you took valuation, you took a relevant class to the industry in. If you're recruiting for oil and gas, do you have like energy or oil? Something to just make it easy for me to say yes. Right.
Yeah. I think the education section can do a good job of justifying your, let's say, intellectual horsepower, or like you're sort of like, oh, this is just a smart person, right? If, because you could be a physics major and have a really high GPA and have honors and stuff. I think that's impressive. I think if you have a good story behind that, um, that section can really present that for you. And if you're highly involved in extracurriculars, that's another kind of win that you can get in that section. I think you're going to hear me and Ryan talk a little bit about some level of discretion with what to include and not to include. So like coursework, and the kind of go no go with coursework is going to be determined by, do you have a bunch of other stuff that you need to show? Like if you don't have like other relevant, let's say work experience or like additional things to put, um, maybe that's when you put in coursework just to kind of like fill some lines. You have a certain number of lines basically that you need to fill. And I don't know what the number would be exactly, but let's say it's like 40 lines. That includes like headers, bullet points, et cetera, et cetera. And each of those lines ideally is just like a high signal thing to say. And depending on who you are, there's just only a certain number of signals. So coursework might be the best signal that's possible, and then you'd include it. The other thing is, and I think this is kind of, I guess, a caveat to all of this is like, if you're joining a banking club, so like if you're going, let's say you're going to Columbia, right? And they have a template that they give you, I would just follow that template very clearly, because the alumni are going to be just looking for that template. So that's another sort of caveat. Like if you already have one that's from your school, like that's like from your banking club, I would not do not the career center one per se, but from your banking club, I would just make sure that you use that. And if you have any questions about any of this stuff, also, you can leave questions in the comments, and we can get to those as well. So if there's any kind of like strange things that don't make sense. The other thing I'll add about education is, for some of you, especially MBAs, you have the undergrad, you have the MBA. Some people are dual degrees. Some people have multiple other degrees. The template that we have has like kind of set out how to do that, because I have multiple degrees going in. So that's just another thing to kind of like look out for and set up. I think another like core principle, which I think we talked about a lot in the last session, which I think is really smart, is that you don't really want to put things on there that you don't want to talk about. I don't necessarily think that means like don't put your GPA, because they probably expect it, at least for undergrads. But like if you don't really want to talk about like your art, let's say your MBA, you did an art degree. If you don't really want to talk about that, just leave the undergrad section as like plain as possible. Just put like that you got this degree from this location at this date, whatever. And just like, you don't need to like explain every detail of that. That's just another, because you have, again, limited number of lines to work with. So, let's go into the next section, which is usually the biggest section. It should be your biggest section, which is experience. Experience is going to be structured in these sort of little like modules where you have like kind of where it's like the name of the company, and then like below that is like your role, and then like some bullet points about like what you did in that role. And again, you can look at the template to get like the full visual. Um, One other like variant of this, which is especially common among MBA, but maybe for undergrads too, is you might work at an organization where you did different projects. So like I was in consulting, I had a role as a consultant. I was both an analyst and a consultant level. So within those, I have like projects that I worked on, because it wouldn't really make sense if I just explained like essentially varying disparate projects within consecutive bullet points, if that makes sense. Like I have to organize the information by project, or it just doesn't make sense. And then the other thing, the last thing is like you need to order it chronologically. That's just, it otherwise it's kind of hard for them to just like track like how you progressed. Anything to add on like that sort of like top level, Ryan, with like how to lay out the experiences?
Well, so for experiences, I also want to caveat there are two things in terms of between your experiences. I'm going to jump back and forth between undergrad and MBA level, right? In terms of, it's going to be a bit different between if you're an MBA. If you're an MBA, your experience, there's just few things I always tell with experience, right? If you're at an MBA, you might have a lot of work history, right? Or you might have quite a few jobs, right? You don't need a kitchen sink every single job or internship you ever done in the past, right? I like to say less is more in terms of only put the most relevant ones, as well as tell the experience and story from the mindset of what they're looking for in an associate,
Yeah.
right? Tell them from the fact that, hey, I need someone that's coming in at sort of like a mid-level manager. I need somebody who can
Right.
lead projects or lead teams, lead deals, or someone who can sit in front of a client, right? Your goal with those experience is translate that into something relevant. Sometimes your official job title is very convoluted and hard to understand,
Right.
right? So reword it, make it easy for someone to understand. I'm not telling you to lie. Do not ever lie on your resume. That is a big no-no.
Yeah.
But like sometimes the titles on your pay stub might be like payment specialist level 2, right? Nobody knows what
Right.
that means,
Yeah.
right? So how do you reword it in that? So have things, it's
Yep.
like you need to translate, or especially if you're an international student from like a foreign country,
Yeah.
right? Things are going to be culturally different. And so this applies to your education as well as it applies to your experience. So for example, if you're, and I'm going to jump a bit back and forth. So on your education part, for example, if you graduated with magna or summa cum laude or highest honors, great. Right? If you're from like another country that does like some GPA that doesn't make sense for the 79 out of 100, I have no clue what that means.
Right.
In the US, translate into something equivalent. Like you could say, equivalent to summa cum laude. So people get it. Make things easy for people to understand. And this is where I think when deciding what experience to list out is, and I don't know if you do this, Mike, I spend a lot of time interviewing my students to really understand what exactly they did and to try to capture a key nuance. For example, were you meeting clients at this role in sales? Were you talking strategy, etc.? So this is where I think having somebody who's been through the trenches, who's sort of interviewed candidates, who knows what they're looking for is where I think sometimes if you're just in a finance club by its own, nobody takes that much time to really understand your story and then package yourself.
Right.
So, but I'm going way off topic.
No,
Very
it's
expansive.
great. I completely agree. I mean, on the first points about you might have worked, I mean, by the time you're in MBA and even in high school, it's like you might have worked at like a ice cream shop in high school, or you were a lifeguard. It's like you don't really need to present every single thing that you did. Sometimes that even means stuff that's like sort of relevant. Like I did a ton of internships and I had like I did it I was doing internships when I was studying civil engineering. I worked in construction management, I worked in structural forensics, which is like structural engineering. I was an operations engineer at a startup, and those things, like I don't know that I even put all of those things on the resume. If I did, it was like 2 bullet points for each of those because there's kind of a limit of how much data they're even going to process. So it's not like it helps you to just like pile on a bunch of data. Another thing about that is that I've met with undergrads who have like, and MBAs too to some extent, but like sort of suspicious seeming internships where it's like, oh, you know, it doesn't sound like you really did that thing, or it was like you're kind of like somehow you have a friend's dad's business and they like hire you on and do a call with you every week. I think like, okay, fair game, put it on if you're, but you need to really be ready to like talk about that. Like
Yeah.
anything you're gonna pick and put on there, you are gonna get grilled on it. And if underneath it all you don't, even if everything else is good, but you have that one thing on there and they grill you on it and they realize, oh, you actually lied about that, or like you didn't really build the DCF for that thing that you said you did,
Yeah.
you're going to really start to lose trust. And it's going to be pretty hard to overcome that, like any kind of dishonesty. So I think I would really emphasize with Ryan, it's like, don't lie. That said, there is like, you know, as we get into sort of the bullet points, right? You're going to come up with you're going to have to come up with numbers and outcomes to certain things. Will you know exactly what those numbers are? Not really. You're going to have to guess and you're going to have to be able to like back that up. So like a lot of people will do something like, you know, I built this tool that saved this process 20% time to complete, right? And the way that they kind of figure that out is they like, you know, okay, I knew the process took 10 hours and it takes 8 hours now with this tool. Is that like, and then you could even extrapolate that to be like, oh, that saved the company this much money, right? Based on like employee wages, like hourly wages and stuff like that. That stuff is fine. I think people expect those numbers to be estimates, but whatever you do and however you go with that, you need to really be able to explain your math, explain your logic. I think if you can back it up and it's reasonable, then you should do it. Because, as we'll get into now, the structure of those bullet points is basically pretty standard. It's pretty much like a verb, then like specific work, some like scale and scope, and then like a result. So pretty much every bullet point needs to have those 4 things. If you don't explain those things, or like let's say you leave out the result. I ran meetings for a Fortune 500 company. Um, I was in charge, you know, I was in charge of the bookkeeping or something. I was in charge of taking notes. If there's not really a result in that, it just doesn't really feel like, it's kind of like, okay, was it like, what was I don't know, where did that gravitate towards? What was the point of you doing that? Why did that even matter? The result really anchors it into business value. And that's the thing that I think people will relate to. So it's like, I took notes for a Fortune 500 company and owned bookkeeping during a $1 billion transaction, or during the completion of a $1 billion transaction, or, you know, facilitating the completion of a $1 billion transaction or whatever. That sort of thing, it gives it a little bit more like specificity. It makes it seem real. It gives them sort of the business context and outcome of like, what was the purpose of that? And that's kind of how I think that that's kind of a key thing to include in bullet points. But what do you think is the most important thing to include in bullet points on a resume for investment bankers,
So I
Ryan?
think for bullet points is I'm going to take a step back even further. Is you need to strategize in terms of what types of bullets you want to put. It's not
Hmm.
just a dump of I did X, Y, and Z, right?
Yeah.
It's back to the whole sales point in terms of what qualities am I trying to show,
Hmm.
right? Did I do something modeling related? Did I do something strategic related? Did I do something client related? Did I do something leading analyst developing, right? And using that to think, right?
Hmm.
I mean, and so it's like I'm going through your resume really quickly. I'm just trying to quick checkbox and I'm trying to see, hey, is this transferable, right? So I see common errors, for example, people like will make their resume sound so quant and they won't have any people skills or they won't have any
Yeah.
leadership skills or they might not have any valuation. And then it's like, great, they did all this and sure, maybe they did the
Hmm.
leadership, etc. Maybe they did results driven, etc. But that hurts you because I just be like smart kid, but not a banker, right?
Right.
So there's a lot of thought that goes into what bullets we want to sort of collate, and this is where
Hmm.
the interview goes through.
Right.
But then on the bullets itself in general
Hmm.
is I see this a lot is that people just said I did this, right? It's very
Right.
like I took a command, I took my marching orders.
Right.
And I think especially at the MBA level, you have to realize you're kind of getting groomed to be a senior banker to advise clients, right? And so
Right.
your resume shouldn't come across as a box mover. I always
Hmm.
like to tell when I was in banking, I would tell my analysts and summer analysts is you're an interior designer, not a box mover. I can hire anybody to move boxes, but I
Right.
can't hire anybody to give their input or suggest like nuances.
Right.
And so write your resume in a sense like you come across as an expert. And then furthermore is instead of playing defense, right, is like Mike and I have both said, do not lie on your resume, right?
Yeah.
I want to push it even further is use your resume to play offense, right? You want to basically
Hmm.
have someone look at your resume and be like, that's an interesting point. I want to talk about that. And instead of
Yeah.
saying, oh, I don't want you to ask me about that DCF I built, you want to be like, I want you to ask me on how I
Yeah.
value that. I want you to grill me so I can showcase
Hmm.
that I know your industry in and out. And so I always think as people fear the resume, people don't spend enough time on their experiences or their bullet points.
Hmm.
I tell folks this is your home field advantage because
Yeah.
you know the universe of what you did. You could
Right.
pick the ones that you want to talk about. You could pick the ones that the other
Yeah.
person sees. So why not pick the ones that you know you could win at? Like, don't waste it on a
Right.
space saying, well, I cold called 50 people. I'm like, okay, great, but what am I going to ask you about? Like,
Right.
so think
Yeah.
think
No,
three
I think
steps
that's
ahead
all.
is what I tell folks.
Yeah. No, that's all really good points. And I think like the path of selecting the right bullet points for your resume is probably one of the most important aspects of doing this in general. And I have a story that my roommate, I've told this story on the podcast before, but my roommate last summer, he interned at B of A. I was at Centerview. And after the summer, we had to like update our resumes for the resume bank for the MBA program. And him now understanding what the job was, he was like, oh, why didn't I put this relevant experience that I had as bullet points before? It's just because if you don't really know what investment banking is truly, you haven't actually done the job. It's going to not be so easy for you or obvious for you to pull out what experiences are going to look the best or be the most relevant. And as Ryan said, um, I think you might think that this job is all technical. And if that's sort of your bias, everything you put is going to look very technical and you're not going to show, let's say, the people side or vice versa. And there could be just all these other little things that you could bring out, which are actually really valuable and things that really only you know that you did. Um, And so you can get a coach to help you with that. But, in addition to that, you just learning about investment banking and what it actually is, and especially on like the day-to-day basis, not just like broadly what it is. Like I think most people broadly understand what it is if you're watching this podcast, but knowing the minutia of what you're actually doing, you'll be able to find those bullet points a little bit better. And that's going to really set up these next step conversations, right? You want them to look at the resume and then ask you a follow up, and you're ready to talk about it. It's like a hook, like each one is sort of a hook, and you're hoping to hook them with it. So, uh, let's talk then a little bit about like the bullets itself. I think now, if we can, if we can, like how do you actually write a good bullet point for your resume after you've decided kind of what bullet points to pick and we weaned that down. Actually, before that, I want to ask what types of bullet points are the most relevant. So, like we talked about technical, we talked about people, but are there other things that maybe people would want to pull out, or like other kind of nuanced types of bullet points?
I mean, it's almost kind of like a MBA application or a college application, right? You don't have to have each experience list out all the relevant skills, right? You could kind of like tell a story, right? Maybe you have one work experience that really showcase your client skills, and then
Hmm.
another experience that really showcase your strategy skills, right? This is
Yeah.
where telling the complete story, right? And this is also where your resume feeds into your tell me about yourself as well.
Hmm.
So I generally, in choosing what bullets to add, is when I look at a client or a student, I can, after interviewing, I will kind of get a sense of where they lean. Like
Yeah.
maybe they're pretty quantitative, maybe they're really strong
Hmm.
technically. Then I'll say, okay, you're kind of missing the people aspect. Where in your experience can we showcase that? Or maybe what in your role? If you're a software engineer, great, you wrote code, but like,
Mm.
were you like part of like some sort of lead community outreach? I don't know. Or did you lead
Yeah.
recruiting? Or were you the one that presented to management every week, right? People might not put that, but I will ask. So I could try to get ways to showcase you don't have any difficulties talking to C-suite executives. So I hopefully that answers the question on which bullets.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think another way sometimes is like, let's say I worked with a candidate who was from a computer science background, and he did an internship, and the entire internship was sort of focused on like one project. So the first bullet point was like sort of very like overview almost. It was like I it was I don't this is not going to be wordsmith well, but it was something like, let's say, architected a solution that would do this and would raise net income by 20%. Let's just say it's that, right? And then the bullet points below that, let's say there's four bullet points. The bullet points below that are kind of like specific details, let's say, of each of those. It's like gathered together the stakeholders, drew up the solution and got agreement, developed and pushed the solution or delegated whatever. So not every bullet point is necessarily the same from a like I, from I don't know what the word would be like, but from like like a level perspective, like some of the bullet points are at a sort of a higher level, and some of them are like sort of more in the weeds, kind of depending on like how the shakes out. But I think that covers pretty well like what to look for and how to select things, and like there's a lot of nuance and advanced strategy to that. Okay, into the actual sentences themselves. I have to say something that I think is critically important for everyone to hear. Um, I hate the term spearheaded. I don't think anyone says this term in real life. I've never heard someone say that in real life ever. The only time I ever see it is on a resume. And when I see it, it just feels so derived. What does that even mean? It means you led a project, right? But really, it's not exactly like you led it. I mean, leading a project is also a pretty generic way to describe it. You could say that you organize the plan and execute it, or you could even lead with executed. or even just saying planned or led is better than saying spearheaded. I just hate that term. And whenever I see it on a resume, it's like one of the first things that I just like cross out. So are there any terms that you find annoying, Ryan, on a resume where you're like, oh, that's like no go?
Well, I think the points are I get more annoyed at the passive ones, so maybe it's because you deal with MBA students a bit more, um,
Mm.
whereas I probably deal with undergrads a bit more. And so the undergrad resumes where like I could generally get a sense of by looking at your resume, if your resume just like I could kind of tell that you did nothing if on your bullet points, if it's just like looked at X, Y, and Z, or just
Mm.
very passive ones, very like sort of taking
Like
marching orders.
researched.
Well, research isn't that bad. Might be like,
I would say
I don't know.
reported is a better term than researched, though. Because to me, researched is like, okay, they just sent you in a cupboard and told you, like, yeah, why don't you go research some stuff? But reported is like, oh, you actually, like, they actually cared about what you were saying. To me,
It it varies. I will say like, I mean, I might actually disagree with you on research versus reported, but that's a whole nother different.
let's hear it.
Well, so I think research, because I come from more from academia, right? So I think of research as like you need some intellectual thought behind to research something, to think about something. I think of it as like analyze. Whereas report, I feel like I could just report. Yeah, I saw a report might be like dog crossed the road. I reported it, right? But like it doesn't give me
Right.
any analysis or understanding. Where if you research something is like you might say dogs have been crossing the more roads more frequently. That might be an uptick of possible loose I don't know, a new adoption program in town. I don't know, right?
But think about this.
Yeah.
So if I'm thinking about investment banking, do I care if someone has done research? Like if you were in the office and someone said, "What'd you do all day?" I just did research. They would be like, "Oh, like and like what's the outcome, right?" The outcome is going to be academically it'd be like published a paper on XYZ. If it's like research, it's like reported on like analytics based on this research that I did. So I always feel like you want to kind of go towards the like actual deliverable and
Yeah.
outcome because that's something that people are going to understand. I know that like when you have interns, a lot of times you'll just tell them like, "Oh, why don't you just go do some research on like this?" And you kind of just like send them
Okay.
away. I know that
Yeah.
you're saying like research, like from an academic perspective, is
Or
actually
from an
like
equity research perspective, right? So
right, right. But
yeah.
in equity research, I would even focus more on like we produced this number of quarterly reports. I added this section based on my analysis of oil
Yeah, yeah.
futures. That would be more to me, that would be more impactful. Because if I hear that someone's done research, it tells me that that was like kind of a fake internship or was an internship where they were just like, just go and do research. We don't want to hear from you.
Well, hence
Um,
the second verb is more important, right? You want to say and published, right? Or presented.
Yes. I would lead
Or
with that
yeah.
verb. I
Yeah.
would lead with the verb that makes you seem the most contributory to the team that you're on. So even stuff like led, it's like led isn't really the best versus like you organize like essentially like okay, instead of saying like something like I led this thing to happen, it's more like I set it's like you and this isn't how you say it exactly in a resume, but it's like I set up weekly calls, I set up a charter, presented it to management, we got it done, we presented the deliverable, we integrated into the code base. It's like more interesting if you can give some verbs that actually explain the action better,
Yeah.
if that makes sense. I like because something like lead, it's so broad, it's so like
Yeah, it's
so
very broad. It's so another thing that I think you and I probably agree on is be specific, right? Be
yeah.
specific to the saying that this is where start with the end in mind. Be specific in your
Hmm.
bullet points so that somebody who reads it would be like they know exactly what you're talking about, or they would be it's specific enough so that they would ask you a question about it. Right?
Yeah.
Sometimes bullet points are so vague. If you say led a team in doing 5 projects, okay, great.
Yeah.
It's like, well,
Yeah. It doesn't
it,
sell anything.
it's think of it as like I always like kind of relate everything to sort of like your investment banking. It's kind of like dating too, right? Make it so that keep the conversation moving, right? With your date, in this case, the bank that's interviewing you, right? So drop in something that you make it feel like a match with them. Drop in something that somebody's going to be naturally curious and want to ask you about, and then you go,
Mhm.
"Aha! You've walked into my trap," and let's start off to the races. We'll talk about, I don't know,
Yeah.
semis or hardware strategy, or I
Yeah.
don't know.
I think there's also a good point in there is like you really need it to be simple, direct, and concise.
Yes.
It's doubly so if your background is engineering or software or anything like technical. Like I was working with this software kid, and like he was like, yeah, I integrated Stripe API with our database to automate a payment, right? I know exactly what that means. I don't know, maybe you know what that means because you've played around in this a little bit. But you don't really need to say it that way. You can say it in more of like you want to say that in more of a way that's just like someone who knows like nothing about software would kind of
Yeah.
interpret what you did. So it's like built in automation that connected um that 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 saved payment into like payments time by 30%, or like saved the compute cost of payments by 20%. Even saying compute cost maybe is too complicated, but you really need to say that in a way as if you're explaining it to like an eighth grader, where you cannot use any technical jargon. The only exception to that would be like technical jargon that is like investment banking specific. Like you could say like, re-raised EBITDA by 20%, or like I did income statement analysis or stuff like that. But for the most part, and even when you do that, the sentence structure and everything around this it needs to be simple, direct, and concise. Eighth grade language. If you're talking to Claude or whatever, simple, direct, concise, eighth grade language. Uh, that way, one of the formative books that I read is Thinking Fast and Slow, and they talk about system one thinking and system two thinking, right? System one thinking is like, what's your name? I can answer that question without any kind of mental strain. System two thinking is where you have to actually kind of lock in and focus. If I said, like, what's 33 times 17, you could answer that question, but it would just take you a second to kind of be like, to do the math in your head. When you have to do that in your head, when you have to go into system two thinking, that creates effort for you. That creates kind of a consternation for you. It's not necessarily pleasant. It's like working out, and it actually burns calories, the pupils dilate, things like that. Throughout the entire process, you do not want people to be going into system two thinking that you're talking to, because they're already tired. They're already doing enough system two thinking that they're paid to do. Keep everything in system one. And the resume especially needs to be in system one. And if you're an engineer, you're a scientist, you're technical, it's very likely that you're going to say something or put something in there that's going to put them into system two thinking. And it's not going to serve you well, even though you think it's simple enough for them to understand. So I would highly recommend that you really break that down. One of the reasons that I've done so well in coaching is that I am technical. So I am very good at understanding what you're talking about and bridging that into the sort of business language. Um, but all of that's to say, keep it simple, eighth grade language, concise sentences, and that will get you in investment banking, coffee chat, internship, offer, whatever. Um, there's a lot more I think that we'll say about resumes. So we'll do a part two next week. You can schedule time with me or Ryan through the links that we have in the bio. There's also, huge the resume template. Like, for sure use that. For sure go there and make an Offer Goblin account and download the resume template and use that. We also have a lot of the points that we talked about in this conversation in that document as well. So that's a really good place to go. Again, link in the description. If you like this video, Go, on YouTube, like this video, subscribe. If you're listening to a podcast, it really helps us out if you like and subscribe to see more of this. So, to our dear viewers, thank you for watching us. I am Mike Neal. This is Ryan Tan, and this has been a excellent coffee chat.